So I'm Geoff Dabelko. I'm here in Oslo, Norway for the 10-year capstone to the Global Environmental Change and Human Security Project. It's been at it 10 years trying to understand how global environmental change and the evolving notion of human security comes together. And one of the primary contributors to this literature, to this work, is Simon Dalby, who is a geographer at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. Simon, you've written a number of books on this, and in fact have a brand new one. I wanted, if you could tell us on security and environmental change, what are the take-home messages from your new book?
What I'm trying to say in the book is that we are effectively living in a new geological era, an era that we sometimes simply now call the Anthropocene. What that suggests is that we have made such dramatic changes to the biosphere that we really do live in new geological circumstances, and those circumstances are our making. Now, we don't usually think that that's what we're doing when we're building things, making things, putting in highways, buying cars. But if you add up all the total of the impacts that humanity is having on the natural world, it has become so great that, in fact, we do live in what the scientists call a new geological era. That has implications for how we think about security. It certainly has implications for how it is that we might prepare to deal with things in the future. And of course, human security is all about preventing harm in the future, trying to take preventative measures now so that disasters and harm doesn't happen in the future. What it means is that we need to think a lot harder about what we are making, quite literally what we are making. The infrastructures we're building, the vehicles we're building, the kinds of factories producing what we are producing is in fact environmental change. Globalization is a physical process, it's an ecological process. We haven't really stopped to think about that. What this means, of course, is that people are vulnerable to potential disasters and difficulties increasingly because of the artificial circumstances in which we now live. We have, after all, become an urban species this decade, although some people don't seem to have stopped to think about the significance of that. It's new and it's important. In the book, I talk about the great disaster of Hurricane Katrina, but I juxtapose it with the lessons that might be learned from the big flood the month before in Mumbai in India. This isn't just a matter of human security for poor marginal peasants in the third world. It's about the infrastructure of big developed cities, both in the south and in the global north. And some of the lessons are very similar. One of the crucial lessons is that you really do need to think about infrastructure, because it's infrastructure that A, keeps people alive in regular, normal times, but it's also the survival of the infrastructure that turns hazards into relatively mild circumstances or into major disasters. And in both the examples from Mumbai and from New Orleans, it's quite clear that lack of preparation, lack of appropriate infrastructure built in advance was key to why a lot of people died and huge amounts of damage was done. So in terms of thinking about human security, we need to think about building codes, urban planning, making sure that there are backup generators to keep the cell phones running so the emergency personnel can coordinate relief aspects. That's the focus in terms of where it is that we now need to think about in terms of human security. It's about planning, it's about preparation, it's about infrastructure, it's about mundane, practical details, because what the Anthropocene suggests is that we are increasingly living in an artificial ecology, and we've got to make sure that as disruptions come, and they will come with climate change, that artificial ecology is not making climate change worse, of course, but is also flexible enough and resilient enough so that when disaster does potentially happen, we've got the infrastructure in place to save people and prevent large death and destruction. We've learned, have we, our lessons from Katrina and Mumbai? Clearly, we need to think about those lessons long and hard. And my book is a contribution for policymakers, but also for students thinking about the intersection of security and environment in this new era of the Anthropocene.
Well, that sounds terrific. I think you are wise to remind us both in terms of where some of the fundamental causes of the insecurity come, which is from ourselves and not from without, so to speak, from here, not just over there, and and that in fact the impacts are going to be very real in that security sense in those wealthier, industrialized, built environments that we typically associate with high capacity, but it's some of that very infrastructure that means high vulnerability as well. So thank you, Simon. We'll look for this new book and all the insights in it.
Thank you.